Here are my top 10 tips for designing your permaculture forest garden. Tip 10 is to think in levels. There are 7 levels of a food forest concept, and you want to keep those in mind from the very beginning. Those levels are overstory, understory, the shrub layer, the herbaceous layer, the root layer, ground cover, and vines. If you keep these different layers in mind from the very beginning, you'll be able to better design your layout for your food forest. Tip number 9 is to watch the light. And this is really important, particularly when dealing with plants, because they feed a lot off of the light. You might be thinking, Derica, you're being very silly right now, but it's really important to watch the light of your particular landscape. Particularly as the seasons change, as the pattern of light will change as well. You want to watch out for obstructions like fences and houses, which may cast shadows. These shadow areas are going to be where you're going to plant your shade-loving plants, and your trees that need full sun are going to have to go in the spaces that have full sun. Number 8 is diversity. Diversity is important, particularly in a food forest style setup, but you want to still keep it simple. You don't want to over diversify and have just one sample of each plant not giving you enough to eat. Remember, to create a permaculture food forest is to create a substantial way of living so that you can feed yourself. If you over diversify, you only have a small number of each fruit and vegetable to eat. So keep that in mind when you're planning your garden. Tip number 7 is to prune smartly. And by that, I mean you want to use the least amount of effort to get the most amount of benefit. For us, we prune most of our fruit trees about head height. And that way, when it comes harvest time, everything is easy to reach. You also want to prune some of your trees, particularly for us, our rampur limes, so that the interior is nice and airy and the exterior remains full. That way, light can reach all of your plant, producing more fruit for you and less trouble when it comes to harvest time. Tip number 6 is to think seasonally. Ideally, you want to have something ready to harvest at each point during the year. So if you make sure to plant early, mid-season, and late varieties of each type of fruit and vegetable, you will have something to harvest and keep your belly full throughout the year. Tip 5 is to space for mature plants. Here we have our moringa tree, and when we bought it, it was only this big. And now, as you can tell, it's way over my head. In fact, it was going super far and we had to top it, because ideally you want to have your moringa so you can harvest the new growth, because that's what you want to eat. So when we planted this, we made sure we had plenty of space for it to grow and not just consider its original height. Also, you want to make sure that you use the different foliage type. And we knew that our moringa was going to have a loose canopy, so that way it wasn't going to block too much of the sun for the understory. Tip 4 is to start small and test. Here, I'm sitting in a failed test site. That's right. Sometimes you make mistakes, and that's okay in gardening. It's part of the experience. We had planted right here a false roselle, also known as a cranberry hibiscus. And I didn't realize how long and leggy it was going to get. And it actually grew because I neglected to prune it correctly, and it crashed into my fig neighboring over on this side. So it kind of had to go away. But before it went away, it gave me tons of babies. So now that I have that test material in my mind, I can better space when I plant those babies in their permanent home. Another thing that you need to test is whether you actually enjoy that plant or not. I liked eating the leaves of the cranberry hibiscus, but my husband Brian didn't so much. So I know I probably only need one plant, and the rest of the babies I can pot up and give away. Number 3 is grow what works well in your area. And the best suggestion I can give to you is to grow natives. Here we have American beautyberry, and it is native to our area. That way I know it's going to grow perfectly here, and I don't even have to worry about it. I don't irrigate it, I don't treat it for pests, and it just grows happily on its own without any intervention from me. And that is a perfect specimen for a permaculture forest garden concept. Another good thing about natives is that it'll attract native wildlife into your garden. And though sometimes birds might be pesky, they're actually really good to incorporate into your garden's landscape, as they will help control pests for you without you having to do anything at all. Number 2 is grow what you eat. And I can't stress this enough, though you would think it'd be a no-brainer, right? But you might get involved in the whole designing process and research of all these different variables that you can plant in your food forest, which is super cool and fun. But if you're not going to eat them, then what's the point of planting them, right? So we know, Brian and I, that we love mulberries. And so we made sure to plant lots of mulberries. 1, they're easy to plant and grow. And 2, we love mulberries. So it was a no-brainer, right? So plant what you're going to eat. Tip number 1 is don't fear change. Gardening in general is a natural situation, right? So there's going to be change, and you're going to learn as your garden grows. Take that information, keep it in mind next time, and adapt and modify your garden as it changes. If you keep this in mind at the very beginning and you don't regret and fear that change is inevitable, then it's going to be a much more enjoyable experience for you. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give us a like, and I'll see you next time on City Steading. Here are my top 10 tips for designing your permaculture forest garden. Should I do that again just to see, was that perky enough or? Here are my top 10 tips for designing your permaculture forest garden. I had it right.